to understand what is going on, what is the impact domestically, but also regionally and geopolitically, and what can be done to help the two parties come back to the ceasefire table and even look for a long-term resolution to the conflict. I have with me Jan Singel, CEO and founder of Strategic Analysis and Associate Fellow of GlobSec, Alina Inaye, the Director of GMF Bucharest Office and the Black Sea Trust, and Alexandra Kirby, Senior Program Manager at the European Endowment for Democracy. Unfortunately, our two special representatives could not be with us as they are currently part of a high-level meeting discussing exactly this topic, but hopefully they will be able to tune in during the 1 hour that we will spend together. One housekeeping note, we will be having a first couple of rounds of introductory remarks and follow-up questions, and then we will turn directly to questions coming from the audience. So please use the chat function of the Zoom so I could pick up your questions and bring them up in the panel. And with that being said, I want to start this first round with you, Jan, and then following with Alina and Alexandra, asking you, how did we get to the 27th of September escalation? What triggered it? And to what extent this new flare is different from what happened in July or what happened in 2016? And if it's different, how this might affect the negotiations between the conflict parties going forward?
Thank you, Alexandra. Greetings from Bratislava. So I will start a bit briefly to take especially your first part of the questions, because if we would sit here over the whole spectrum of the questions, I think we would need a little bit more event or more time frame. Well, I think it's at this point observing the situation taking place on the ground in Nagorno Karabakh and in the relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I think it's safe to say that we are witnessing already a full-scale war conflict. Old-style 20th century country against country over disputed territory, with some features of the 21st century, like massive use of the UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, massive use of disinformation and propaganda, use of certain hybrid aspects of the waging military operations, like, for example, involvement of foreign fighters on the side of the Azerbaijan, transferred there from Syria and potentially also from Libya by Turkey. And of course, we are witnessing the involvement of the international players, regional players, and on the other hand, kind of a silence or very vague reactions by the main international players, which have now their own problems. The very imminent reason of this current state where we are, of the war that we are witnessing right now, I think it goes, I mean, now I'm talking just about this very current situation. I think it goes back to the July this year escalation on the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Of course, the whole conflict or the roots of this conflict, they go a lot far into the history, back to the 1988, 1994 conflict, but even before, even to the times of formation of the Soviet Union. But we don't have time to, of course, discuss the history. We should focus on our attention now, what is going on now, and what we should do. That's the most important, I think. So why I said that I believe the current escalation has its roots in July. In July, there was a clash on the international border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It was rather limited. I believe it was sparked by an accident on the borderline that spun out of control. There were unfortunately casualties on the both sides. But what we saw at that time was quite vague or very mild reaction of the international community. on one hand, also Russia, the traditional ally of Armenia, but at the same time trying to have a good relations with Azerbaijan too. It has quite a mild reaction to this escalation, also the international community. Luckily, that time the situation de-escalated quite quickly with limited losses of lives or exchange of territory. However, after that, we could see very strong support from Turkey, very rhetorically strong support from Turkey for Azerbaijan, not only in rhetoric actually, but also in material, in military equipment, especially UAVs. Then there were military exercises taking place on the territory of Azerbaijan and Nakhichevan, where air forces of Turkey and Azerbaijan took place. So there was a kind of a development on that side. On the other side, we witnessed very strong rhetorics also from side of Yerevan and also Stepanakert, and also the development in the international environment. We saw Russia being more occupied with Belarus, which is an imminent neighbor to Russia and the most important ally. There were contested or fraudulent elections, presidential elections that led to opposition protests. And focus of Russia's attention was focused on this problem. On the side of the European Union, we can see really spike in numbers of COVID-19 cases, and Europe again preoccupied with the pandemics. In the United States, so we have upcoming presidential elections with the current administration focusing on the pre-election campaign. So it did all these circumstances, all this atmosphere with the really bellicose rhetorics on both sides led to start of the war or military actions themselves, taking into consideration the realities on the ground, and also yesterday's speech by Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev. I think it's safe to say that Azerbaijan wanted to change the current status quo with the military action. So the incentive was quite clearly on the Azerbaijan side. Azerbaijan was voicing for a long time that they are not satisfied with the status quo that was taking place on the ground for over 27, 28 years. They were not satisfied with the negotiations that were taking place and wanted to change this status quo, or change this, improve its position by gaining some more advantageous positions on the ground. So this is kind of a geopolitical view. Armenia, on the other side, being in the control of the Nagorno Karabakh territory, it has no incentives for starting a military actions. It can only lose, because Armenia is a smaller country in population, also a lot poorer than Azerbaijan. Its defense budget is a lot smaller than Azerbaijan. So it's really not in Armenia's interest to spark any new military activities around. So what we could witness over these 8 days is escalation of the initial contact into a really full-scale military campaign taking place now currently around the whole contact line around Nagorno Karabakh, but also impacting both Armenia and Azerbaijan, their own territories.
Thank you very much, Jan, for this first account. Indeed, I think that the parties do blame each other, who started first, and there is a lot of disinformation that is pouring into two narratives that seem to have no common ground, including the accusation of Armenia of having Turkey shutting down one of their Sukhov plane the other day, and of course the Azerbaijanis' accusations that Armenia was shelling the second largest city of Azerbaijan during the weekend, the city of Ganja. Alina, what is the feeling or the understanding from just across the Black Sea in Bucharest? What is going on? And when it comes to the international community or the regional, the neighbors, is there any reaction? Is there any interest for other countries besides the co-chairs of the Minsk Group or even the EU itself to react?
Before answering this exact question, I want to go back to your initial questions and answer at least the first one, which is how we got here. I think it was pretty much to be expected, and everyone was talking about violence erupting in Nagorno Karabakh again, and it did repeatedly. And to something big as it happens this time to actually happen. And I see three reasons for why this happened, for why we got here, and for why this was somehow unavoidable. The first one is that the Minsk process, the negotiation process, the peace-bringing process between Armenia and Azerbaijan, was never a serious peace process. It was more looking at what is called negative peace, was like keeping things from going to worse, rather than really coming to a compromise, coming to a solution, to an end to the conflict. The two parties, Armenia and Azerbaijan, never compromised, not an inch on anything. All of the meetings of the Minsk process were very black and white, and everybody left with exactly the same positions as they came into the meeting. So the Minsk process wasn't an effective process, and everybody agreed with this. The second reason why I think this is happening now, as opposed to a year from now or 2 years ago, is the domestic pressures in both of the countries, but most especially Azerbaijan, with a lower price of oil, which puts a lot of pressure on the Azerbaijani economy, and which also at its turn puts a lot of social pressure on the Azerbaijani population. And with everything that is going on with the shrinking of the economies because of the COVID crisis. So this brings, this puts domestic pressure on President Aliyev to perform one way or another, and this may be one way to try to perform. And then there is a more, I want to say subtle, but it's not the subtle element of it, which is the US withdrawal from the region in general. US used to have a somewhat important role in the Minsk process, in the relation with Azerbaijan and even Armenia, and in what involves Nagorno Karabakh as well. And as I said, throughout the region, and with its withdrawal, general withdrawal from the world, but from the region as well, it left a little bit of a void, which is trying to be filled in by other more regional powers like, say, Turkey or Russia. So this conflict is different. This iteration of the conflict, if you want, is different because we have already seen Turkey getting directly and pretty strongly involved. And this is a reason of concern for countries in the region. To come back to your initial question, how is the region looking at it? This is the reason of real concern, is the involvement of Turkey and the potential involvement of Russia into the conflict, which will really make this conflict a regional one, and one of a bigger importance or military importance than we really like to see. I haven't seen too many bilateral or direct, if you want, reactions from the countries around the Black Sea, but I did see a lot of reaction of the international fora these countries belong to, like, you know, the UN or the EU, but nothing so far when it comes to individual positions. And things are still pretty much unfolding, so I think a lot still has to happen, and a lot still has to be observed and digested.
Thank you, Alina. Alexandra, to bring you into the conversation, your work on specifically the civil society and the Track 2 initiatives and everything that happens in parallel to the political process is of crucial importance for the development of the region. And I was reading earlier today some ICRC accounts on civilian shelling, indiscriminate shelling of civilian infrastructure, And of course, we are on the onset of winter. So there is a lot going on with impact on both sides. The number of casualties, at least the confirmed ones, reached 240 today. But the unofficial numbers from both sides actually go way, way higher. So what is going on when it comes to the civil society impact, but also the civil society potential role in moving the situation into de-escalation?
Yes, so that's a really good point to start with about, whilst we're analysing this from a rational perspective, we need to remember the very high human cost that these 8 days of fighting has taken. So we do have official figures, at least from the Armenian side, about how many servicemen have been killed during the fighting. It's at least 200. Azerbaijan, we will only know at the end of the fighting, I believe. Regarding civilians, there have also been dozens of deaths reported on both sides. As for how civil society are reacting, we have many groups of volunteers on both sides working tirelessly to provide different aid. At ED, we know of different civil society members who mobilized and went to fight on the front line very early on in the conflict. So that's partly in response to how is this different? I mean, the mobilization levels on the first day were much, much higher than in the past. We're also in touch with journalists who are working from bomb shelters trying to create podcasts. We're also in touch with people on both sides of the line of contact whose hometowns are being shelled. And I also heard some tragic news of people who are close to our colleagues this morning of deaths. So I think we need to, first of all, really recognize this very high human costs. When it comes to the position of civil society in both countries, I think we can see that the vast majority are supportive of their government's approaches. And we do not see many voices in either country calling for a different approach for peace building. However, we are beginning to slowly see some of these voices emerge despite all the pressures that they are under. And these pressures are slightly different in the different countries. So we saw about in Azerbaijan earlier last week, there was one activist, Gia Ibrahimov, who was detained for a few hours due to his anti-war statements. So there is direct repression from the government on these kind of statements. In Armenia, it's slightly different. The government is not directly repressing such statements, but there is definitely peer pressure, and there is a high level of self-censorship among what to write on Facebook, what to write on Twitter. And it's also worth noting that many of these voices who are coming out with pro-peace statements are definitely from the younger generation. But this kind of contributes to a broader point that I would like to make, and also is in response to how did it lead to this situation. And that is simply the level of pluralism that we have in both countries. So, I mean, we will remember that, back in 2014, for example, Arif and Leyla Yunus in Azerbaijan were arrested and on the charges of spying for Armenia. So I think this example is something which shows that, there hasn't been space for peaceful dialogue in Azerbaijan, and also, honestly, in Armenia for quite a while. We do, in Armenia, there's a political party, the Armenian National Congress, they were losing elections back in 2017, and a lot of the analysis back then was because they were trying to make peaceful statements and potentially compromising around Karabakh issues. So I think that I think a major focus of our thinking, and when we come on to discussing solutions, should be about what kind of level of pluralism do we have in both societies. I would also like to mention as a third point the levels of disinformation and hate speech that we are receiving, that we are observing on both sides. And I think I saw this this war being described on 3 levels. It's land, air, and information war as well. So I think, so obviously there's a lot of hacking, there's a lot of disinformation going on, but an additional complicating factor is in Azerbaijan, internet is extremely restricted. This means that independent media who are trying to report on the conflicts are having major difficulties. It means that citizens trying to access different information are also having problems. I hear that there is also rumors going around about if you're using VPN to access websites, then this could be met with a fine. So this is also concerning. And of course, journalists are restricted from actually going to the front line or in the areas around, ostensibly for safety, but others may question whether there are other reasons to this as to why the government wishes to control the narrative. So essentially in Azerbaijan, we're seeing a lot of media outlets who are literally repeating the government statements. And so this access to information, access to internet is definitely a major problem and will play its role both now and also in the future. So.
Based on that, Alexandra, actually, we had a question that I would like to take it up from Andrei Matishak, asking what are the sources then that you would recommend that would give a balanced or an accurate account of what's going on, considering the difficulties. Do you have any 1, 2, 3 recommendations on the spot, or?
I think that the ones who are best in place to provide information are those based in the region, I would say, and they usually operate from Georgia. So OSCE Media is an extremely valuable outlet because they have reporters on both sides. Eurasia Net is also providing extremely extensive coverage. So these are the 2 ones which I would highlight. There are probably others, but these come to mind straight away.
Thank you, Alexandra. Alina, back to you. Jan mentioned that there is an attempt of changing the status quo, at least from the Azeri side. And you also mentioned the 3 motives that led to it, and one of it being the economic situation in Azerbaijan. So if we are looking at what is at stake, what do the parties want to gain with this current escalation, and how willing are they to go further? To where are they willing to go further to secure this respective objectives? Because we saw also alleged claims that certain villages in Nagorno Karabakh were taken by Azerbaijan forces currently, and there was a timeline given to Armenia to withdraw. So how far this will go, and what is the end game, at least for this episode, in your view?
Well, I think the end game for Azerbaijan is again, as was said here before already, to change the status quo and to be able to go back into negotiations with a changed situation on the ground. If you look at the map of Nagorno Karabakh, it's very difficult for the Azeri army to really go into the heart of Nagorno Karabakh. It's very mountainous. So I do believe that they are going to press a little bit on the Nagorno Karabakh side of the Azeri side, and try to advance a little bit into those villages, but it would be very complicated. It would cost a lot of human lives really to go deeper into the mountainous regions. So I don't think the intention is to really conquer the entire Nagorno Karabakh and take it back, to put it this way, but really to advance as much as it can be advanced without too many losses, and then go back into negotiations. But this would be different negotiations from a different status quo. It's if you want, this is kind of a Russia tactics. That's what Russians have been doing in Crimea. That's what Russians are trying to do in Ukraine as well. You go there, you change the status quo, and then you go back into negotiations. So I think that's what Azerbaijan is after. But also, beyond this military, if you want, strategy, there are also domestic political calculations, because President Aliyev does want to go back to his people and say, I've done it for you. This is how I proceed further. I can still be a very good ruler of this country, despite the bad economic, or the worsening rather, economic situation.
Jan, you mentioned exactly the same, the changing of the status quo, but in the same time, building on what Alina said with the withdrawal of the US as one of the co-chairs of the Minsk Group, I'm just wondering, what are the implications for the Minsk Group and for the OSCE in this current moment, as they are the ones appointed by all the others in the international community as the channel or the avenue for de-escalating, and considering the lack of leadership at the OSCE level currently, but also the very diverse interests and needs at present by the three co-chairs. Where do you see the OSCE playing a role in the current situation?
Well, thank you, Alexandra, for $1 million question. Well, it's very difficult. As the question itself is complex, the response is also difficult. First of all, yes, you very correctly highlighted that there is a kind of a problem with the leadership in the OSCE itself. It also appeared around the midsummer, so it could also affect the movements on the ground or willingness to use this kind of a weaker spot. On the other hand, I must say that I'm a believer in the OSCE, because OSCE is putting together all those countries involved and that have impact and that are directly influenced. So I think that OSCE should and must play a role. The other thing is how to make the format of Minsk Group more actionable. Taking into consideration, of course, the natural limitations of the OSCE and the decision-making process and its internal processes. So yes, that is a challenge. But on the other hand, that is the only forum at the moment that we have at hand which can represent views or interests of all involved, literally all involved in the conflict. If we would step back and we would try to do some kind of a different framework, maybe it would be needed at the end of this current, I would call it, second war for Karabakh. Maybe we would have to go to a different setup of the international community solving this issue more actively. But at the moment, or up until now, that is the only format which is really representing all the views around. I would like to maybe add what Alina was saying to come back a little bit to what she was mentioning. Yes, Nagorno Karabakh, well, the name itself, Nagorno, means mountainous, so it's really rough terrain. So any potential gains will be or are at the moment already offset by huge personal losses in material, military equipment, and especially human lives. So we can see that already. And yes, Azerbaijan has an upper hand in terms of the military equipment, is investing a lot into its military. On the other hand, Armenia is controlling the higher ground, or most of the higher ground, and had basically 30 years to build defense positions in the mountains. So this plays in their hands. So again, this can be kind of a standstill for the warring parties. As what could be the goals for interested parties. Yes, Azerbaijan is voicing that they would like to retake the Nagorno Karabakh in its full extent. There is a question of whether it is realistic. More likely, as Alina said, it's kind of a salami tactic of cutting a piece of Karabakh territory, adding it to its own territory, and using that as a kind of a propaganda for supporting or strengthening the Azerbaijani regime on the domestic front. There was one interesting thing taking place during the July flare-up of the tension on the Armenia-Azerbaijan border. During that time, during that process, there was a very unusual, for Azerbaijan, very unusual protest that gathered around tens of thousands of people protesting actually for war with Armenia, against Armenia. And I think this also kind of emboldened the current administration of Azerbaijan, that there is a kind of a popular support or popular want for military conflict, so they kind of delivered. But this is a quite double-edged sword, because if they will fail in reaching the goals, or if the costs of lives are too high, then the administration can get into a lot bigger troubles than they are now. Just to remind, there were already 2 presidents of Azerbaijan that had to step down because of not successful campaign in the Nagorno Karabakh conflict.
Thank you for bringing back into the framework that will help us understand better the current situation. Alexandra, just to get back to you, so we know for sure that from the military perspective, there is no interaction between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the positions, the military positions are quite separate, and there is no interaction. However, are there civil society initiatives that allow for this informal conversation between the people on the ground? Is there any track 2 initiative that might be the golden bullet that will allow us to actually jump over what's going on politically and allow civil society to come together in this regard to ensure peace?
This is a very good question to be asking at this point. The first part of my response will be rather pessimistic, because unfortunately a lot of people I've been in touch with have been commenting on how all of these peace initiatives over all the years have been a complete waste of time. And I think it is also significant that we are not seeing many of the older voices involved in many of these exchanges online. However, that said, I believe that there is some reason to be hopeful. I and some others have been gathering peaceful statements. What we see both written in Azerbaijan and in Armenia. There have been a few more in recent days, and we were having some sort of small discussion and believing that perhaps this could form the basis of some future efforts. I would also like to comment that regarding the existing structures, it's extremely difficult at the moment, because one colleague was mentioning that she is trying to be in touch with her Azerbaijani counterpart. However, due to security considerations, they also do not feel that it's very safe for them to be communicating. So I think right now the security risks are very prevalent. And also there are obviously some peace-building organizations who've been involved in the field for a long time, many of them related to EPNK. And they, of course, have their structures in place and they are doing important work. However, at the moment, it seems that the situation is a little bit desperate. I would like to hope that this is an emotional response that we are seeing, and that once emotions start removing, we will see something more practical in place.
It looks like a textbook example of conflict escalation curved list, and there is just no ripeness at the moment to move in any direction. Alina, I want to get back to you, to Russia and Turkey possible involvement, if we will get to that. So what are the implications geopolitically, regionally, but also for other conflicts in the proximity if Russia and Turkey do get involved on the side of Armenia, respectively, Azerbaijan? Be that Syria, be that Belarus, be that Ukraine, is there a possible involvement of even of NATO, if that will be the case? So what's your assessment in this regard?
First of all, you said that, if Turkey and Russia will get involved, but Turkey has already gotten involved through Erdogan's very, very strong statements and through apparently, allegedly, the foreign fighters, the Syrian fighters that they are bringing from Syria. That is already a very serious involvement. Russia has not gotten that involved yet, and that is for 2 reasons. First of all, Armenia doesn't really want Russia to get involved, at least at this stage, because nobody really wants a serious war, not even the 2 parties involved. And secondly, because Russia itself, it's a little bit reluctant to spread itself even thinner in yet another conflict. But we already have one regional power, as I said, Turkey, involved in there, and this is really different. To answer your initial question of some minutes ago, this is really different from from July and from the previous iterations of the conflict. Will it have any regional impact on the other conflicts? See, I don't really think so, because this conflict is very, very different from all the others. This conflict is different from Transnistria. This conflict is different definitely from South Ossetia, which are very artificially created conflicts. It might be somewhat similar to other conflicts in Georgia, but not seriously. This is the only serious ethnic conflict in the region. That is why it has been so difficult to address it and to solve it so far. So I don't think that even Russia would get involved, which I highly doubt it will happen. I don't think this will have an impact on the other conflicts in the region. As about NATO, the only reason for NATO to really get involved would be through Turkey, but that would be extremely difficult, because Turkey is not being under attack. It's a non-NATO territory, non-NATO country territory that is being disputed. So I don't really see how NATO could be directly involved. But the geopolitical implication, though, the way I see it from the Black Sea region, where I see, is that something that a concept, if you want, that we've been talking about for, I want to say 2 years, if not more, which is the very wide Black Sea region, which goes all the way from the Caspic region through the Mediterranean, through Middle East, all the way to Mediterranean. This concept is really getting contour. This concept is really becoming serious, not only as a concept, but as a strategy that, look, Turkey is employing. Turkey is being involved in various conflicts, even creating some conflicts, all the way from Mediterranean to now Black Sea region through Nagorno Karabakh. So maybe when we approach the conflicts, we look at them through this wider lens, and when we approach the Black Sea region, we also look at it through this wider lens.
That's I'm happy that you brought that up. I want to pick Jan's brain on it. But before, Didi Madlova, Tamar, for sharing the call of Abkhaz, Georgian, and Ossetian peace builders. I think that's a wonderful example on how civil society across contact lines can work together. Jan, I want to hear your thoughts on the broader Black Sea region, what Alina said on how geopolitically these three seas, like the Caspian, the Black Sea, and Mediterranean, start to be connected and seen through more or a different strategic lens. But I also want to get Andrei's question on what are the instruments that the EU could leverage at the moment to push for de-escalation, because the EU through the Eastern Partnership Framework and other mechanisms is quite present in the region, not just when it comes to negotiations with Baku over oil reserves or pipelines, but also with Armenia. What do you see as possible channels for the EU to act and not necessarily putting all the pressure on the OSCE?
Thank you. Well, first about the Eastern Mediterranean, Black Sea region and Caspian region. Well, what connects them at the moment is actually involvement of Turkey, because Turkey as a NATO member country has its stake in the Eastern Mediterranean, as we could see escalation, very recent escalation between Greece, Cyprus, Turkey, and some other players in the region. Whereas now it seems that Turkey is more and more involved also in this current conflict. Some things are confirmed, some things are still not yet confirmed. So that makes it even more complicated and more complex, this conflict. Involvement of NATO, as you were discussing a minute ago, yes, that would be only in case of Turkey being attacked. Only that this question could be on table, but I frankly don't think that will be the case, because kind of a imagination of a small Armenia attacking huge Turkey is out of limits of the reality, and I don't think that Turkey needs to NATO's assistance in relation to Azerbaijan or Armenia. however, we kind of forgotten maybe about one more player that is important in this area, and that is the CSTO. And I would argue that the CSTO, so the Common Security Treaty Organization, is the first victim of this conflict, actually, because as you know, Armenia is a member country of the CSTO. But CSTO is actually paralyzed at the moment because of the internal struggles in Belarus. Belarus is also a member country, and then two other members of the CSTO, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, of ethnic Turkic origin, who issued statements that they will not come to help Armenia, even if attacked by Azerbaijan on its internationally recognized territory. So that leaves CSTO out of the question and puts Armenia's membership in this organization under a big question. But it really makes sense to be a part of this quite a broad institution. Maybe the relations or existing treaties with Russia will be enough for Armenia to secure its territory. Yes, the position of Russia at the moment is kind of in a waiting mode, and we will see what their reaction will be. As for the role of EU, I didn't forget about it, Andrei. Thank you very much for the question. I would say that EU has quite weak leverage on the South Caucasus. Neither of these countries have ambitions to join the European Union, unlike the Western Balkans, where EU can play the enlargement card. Armenia cannot even join the EU because it's part of the customs union and the agreements with Russia. It has a certain framework with the EU called CEPA framework. Azerbaijan is not even interested at that level of cooperation between EU and their country, only interested in selling the oil and gas to EU member states. So I would say that the position of EU is quite weak in terms of making these two countries come to the negotiation table or working from the position of power. EU as institutions, well, it's member states, they might have more kind of a leverage, especially France, that is a member of the Minsk Group and CSTO, and has interests in this region too. What EU could now purely theoretically contribute with is something similar to what we have in Georgia EUMM mission, so with kind of a monitoring mission that would maybe observe at least the international borders between Armenia, Azerbaijan, Armenia and Nakhichevan, in order there is some kind of mechanism of following what is really going on the ground, because as we were saying at the beginning of this session, there are not really too many monitors, and international journalists are just arriving to the area. So there is a vacuum of information, and that vacuum of information is misused by both sides, using this information vacuum in order it follows their needs, in order they can use the disinformation there or other place. So.
Alexandra, do you agree with the statement that EU is quite weak when it comes to the tools available for engagement? And I'm just thinking out loud of the Eastern Partnership Framework. I'm thinking of what you guys do with EDF, the technical assistance that is still going on. That's first part of my question. And the second, because we keep on going back to disinformation, misinformation, and lack of accurate news from the ground. Is EDF planning on helping civil society build an instrument, or you guys have any plans on ensuring that what comes from the region could be served for policy making, both in the region, but also for EU member states and EU as such?
Yeah. First of all, on what the EU can do within such a context. I mean, it depends, are we treating symptoms or treating causes? Right now, I think what we see regarding the symptoms, I was happy to see that, funding has been released to support civilians within affected by the Karabakh conflict. So this is very good. I was thinking about, the instruments as well. I mean, we shouldn't also forget that right now Azerbaijan and the EU are having prolonged negotiations over a strategic agreement. We don't really have many details over that process. However, I do know that during this process, the state of independent civil society has definitely been a focus of that. But whether this would be a strong enough leverage for discussing peace issues, I would not be able to comment on that. But I would like to mention within this context and within the bigger how this can be solved, I mean, how we can create more conditions for pluralism. This issue of NGO legislation in Azerbaijan really needs to be kept on the table. I think, you know, one of the big problems that we're seeing in Azerbaijan and the response to the conflict at the moment is simply for the last 5 years, civil society has been completely destroyed. I mean, most of them are working in a very underground, uninstitutionalized manner. And, you know, peace building really has not been on top of the agenda. It's more about being about survival. So I think, you know, to really to treat one of the causes, this is something which needs to be really brought into attention. Regarding what we as EED can do in this situation, I think that we always see ourselves as a platform for civil society. So we very much see it as a way of, you know, channeling the voices of our different partners and being able to provide this platform in order to express their views further to different stakeholders within the EU and possibly others. So this is something that we do. Another instrument related to the EU is, of course, the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum, which has been mentioned. And I would also like to mention that they were the first ones, and I think so far the only ones, to release a statement which was signed by both the Armenian and Azerbaijani side. So I believe that, you know, this is also an interesting tool. So to sum up, whether they are in a strong or weak position, I do not want to comment on that. However, there are tools which are available and which can be used. But I think, you know, really the immediate concern is, you know, bringing about a ceasefire so that these options can actually be put on the table and explored.
Thank you, Alexandra. Alina, going back to you, we saw declarations on both sides in the international community. There is a need for mediation. There is a need for more international effort and attention going back. So who is credible at the moment to help the conflict parties come together? Who are the leaders, either political or the groups or the institutions that could actually play an immediate positive role in the current context?
I'm not sure about an immediate role because, as Alexandra was saying earlier, we are in the very violent phase of the conflict. So it takes a ceasefire before we can actually go further into negotiation. In terms of the international fora or bodies that have enough credibility, I still believe that OSCE is the vehicle to go through, and I do realize that there is a lack of leadership and they haven't been quite that successful in the past, but it is a body that is being trusted by both sides, is being trusted by Russia as well, is being trusted by Turkey as well, which are directly involved in this conflict. So going forward with OSCE, but in a different manner, in a more vigorous manner, going after positive peace and not only negative peace. I think it's still the way. It's still the way to go. At this point, I see no individual country, be it in the EU or US, even less US, to be able to take control of the conflict, to say so. But I do want to say something when it comes to disinformation, because you've been asking the question of disinformation 3 or 4 times. I think it's very important to realize that this disinformation, or some sort of disinformation, has been going on really for 30 years. Everything that, or most of the things which are being published in Armenia about Azerbaijan are being not necessarily true, and the other way around. So there has been this culture of I don't want to say hate, but I will for lack of a better word, or not trusting each other. Let's put it this way. This culture of not trusting each other has been really cultivated for at least 30 years. So this also has to be dealt with once the ceasefire has been reached.
Jan, same question to you. Are there any leaders or groups or institutions credible to step in at the moment or even at a later stage once a ceasefire is agreed upon? Though it seems that a ceasefire cannot be agreed upon directly, so there might be some opportunity for a third party to get involved.
Yes, that is also my kind of worry, but that we are still in that part of the conflict where we are not anywhere close to a ceasefire, which is worrisome, of course, because there are some more human lives lost and will be lost. But what I meant under the EU's weak position or weak impact on these two countries, I meant immediate response to the current development to impose, for example, ceasefire. I didn't mean the post-conflict reconstruction, where of course EU has its tools and it's definitely its place. But I was talking more about the current state and the kind of a putting out the fire, right? As for who should do the putting out the fire, well, it seems that there are too many advisors, there are too many bodies suggesting that somebody else should take that responsibility. But at the moment, nobody is taking that responsibility in that way that the both countries would be really persuaded to ceasefire and come to a negotiation table. Russia may play that role because of the influence on both countries. It can play the role of a kind of external actor to put immediately. They did it a couple of times before. Yes, they did it because it was in their interest, because in their interest is not the total war between the two countries, because in that case they would have to choose, and based on the agreements, security and defense agreements they have with Armenia, they should take Armenian side, and that would inevitably mean that they would alienate Azerbaijan. So Russia really doesn't want a total war going on in this region. Another actor might be even France. President Macron had discussions with some of the leaders on the ground. He had held discussions also with President Putin. So, and we are again getting to that kind of a Minsk format. So whether we like it or not, whether there is a strong leadership or not, we are always coming back to the OSCE. So maybe a strong push from the leaders of the Minsk Group countries. We will see how the US administration will react. We know that the election campaign is now ongoing, but at least France, Russia, and with some assistance from the US diplomacy might be involved in putting the fire out immediately and trying to restore the ceasefire. After that, well, still OSCE, I still believe OSCE is the framework that should be used because it is trusted by all the participants, or they like it and they hate it at the same time. But that's the only venue that we have at the moment.
I think that's the story of the OSCE since its inception, but that's a different conversation for a different time. I want to remind everyone that we are really in the last 5 minutes, so if there is any question that you would like to bring up, now it's the moment. If not, I will start with the last round of questions, and I would ask you also to have the wrapping remarks as part of it. If you were an advisor to either sides or to the international community, what would you see as a credible commitment to peace by both sides? How would you envisage the settlement longer term that will be at the end of the day in service of the people and of those civilians that are currently terribly affected by the military tensions. So we had last year, if not wrong, some first signals that the leaders wanted to prepare the population for peace. Somehow there were testing grounds for it. So maybe there is an opportunity once we are going into a zone of possible agreement to see a credible commitment to peace. How would that look like in your view? Shall I start the reverse order, or yeah, Alida, go ahead.
Listen, in order to achieve peace, and how I would really recognize that this is a genuine intention towards peace, I would see a very different rhetoric from political leaders, both in Azerbaijan and in Armenia, where not they would only prepare the population for peace, which is what they should be doing, but they also would show really personal commitment to the peace process. And secondly, the same leaders, I would see the same leaders going into the negotiations with some flexibility when it comes to their position, and with some willingness not to compromise, people hate this word, but to reach a solution, to reach a mutual understanding, rather than just these bellicose exchanges of different opinions. Without this, I think we cannot really talk about a peace process. But we have to understand that a peace process or ceasefire is not a peace process and the other way around. So I do hope that the ceasefire is reached, as soon as possible, but the peace process would only start afterwards, and it takes much longer.
Jan?
Okay. Well, first of all, there is no military solution for the Nagorno Karabakh conflict. That is not a phrase, that is a fact. As I said a few minutes ago, every military gains are offset with lots of lost human lives, destruction of material, values even, and values on the ground. What can be the kind of a formula, or what can be next step? I wouldn't be afraid to use that word, compromise. I think the only possibility out is the compromise. But how to get there, that is a question, because both communities, they are in deep distrust against each other, not only because of the conflict that is being waged for over 30 years, and that is fed by kind of even national mythology about Karabakh, and it's on the both sides, unfortunately. People are kind of growing up because with that kind of a mythology. Even young people that maybe never saw that conflict developing 30 years ago, they are still in that conflict through this kind of a history and this kind of stories. So this deep mistrust, I don't think can be overcome by the two countries themselves. There needs to be very strong involvement of the international community. I hope that there will be ceasefire as soon as possible, but then the peace process will need a really strong leader. Can it be Minsk Group, but strengthened with the leaders of the main Minsk Group countries that are really helping the process? And both sides, they really need to have the solution finding a solution in their minds. Because without compromise, there can be no solution. And this compromise must be observed by the international monitors and ideally international peacekeeping mission. Because of the deep mistrust between the two countries, I don't believe they will agree on a compromise without being supervised by the independent body.
Thank you, Jan. Alexandra?
I would just like to reinforce the point I made earlier about the space for pluralism, the space where citizens and other actors have the feeling that they are able to express their opinions, whether they're popular or not. It's also important to be able to create conditions for factual evidence-based debates, which is done in a respectful manner. within each country, and also for there to be accountability mechanisms. So, for example, next time, a leader would say Karabakh is ours, the population might actually be able to hold that person to account. To end on a semi-positive note, being in touch with many young activists in both countries, I have a lot of faith that more creative solutions can be found to resolve this. I also know that there are several peace-building organizations who are extremely experienced in this area and doing good work in very tough situations. It would also be interesting to hear their voice at some point. And I believe that, of course, the first step is the ceasefire.
Alexandra, Jan, Alina, thank you very much for this conversation. I hope that we brought a bit of clarity or some ideas to the table. I would like to thank also our participants, virtual participants, for staying with us for this long hour, and also a bit of a promo information. The GloBSEC Bratislava Forum 2020 starts on the 7th of October, both in virtual and in person format. So you are invited to follow the debates on our GloBSEC website. Thank you again. Have a good afternoon, and let's hope for that ceasefire to be agreed upon ASAP. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.